Welcome to this edition of Inside the Academy Studio.
Today's conversation will be about Steven Spielberg's Lincoln. Lincoln is adapted to screen by Tony Kushner, and it's based on the novel biography by Doris Kearns Goodwin, presidential historian, called Team of Rivals. And the plot basically takes place at the beginning of 1865. Many believe, Lincoln himself included, think that the Civil War is nearing its end. But he is worried that the abolishing slavery will be forgotten, and that his Emancipation Proclamation will be also forgotten. So he makes a push to get a vote passed in the House for the 13th Amendment to abolish slavery in the entire nation. And basically the story is about the political maneuvering and moral views and character qualifications that lead to that monumental bill passage, and then eventually the last, just before Lincoln meets his fateful end. I'm going to bring in my co-host here.
Yes.
And we're going to start off with the fact that much of the praise for Lincoln has gone to Tony Kushner's adapted screenplay. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people are saying it's a movie about words and how these lessons of political discourse can really apply to today and today's political environment. So do you think there is any advice or lessons to be learned from the political maneuvering of Lincoln's era?
Well, I think it just shows it's a different time, definitely. I mean, you fully see Lincoln doing questionable things to sway the vote in the way that he needs it to go, right?
Right.
So that
things
kind of,
like giving federal appointments to outgoing Democratic congressmen.
Yeah, like getting difficult things done takes doing difficult decisions, right. And those difficult decisions include making the questionable decisions.
I think the lesson should be that even if difficult things need to be achieved, you still need to have dialogue. Mm-hmm. And throughout this entire narrative, you have Republicans, radical Republicans. You have Democrats who don't agree, but can be swayed. They're talking about these issues, mm-hmm. And then Lincoln's conviction, he's so adamant of getting it passed that through words, through conversations, a lot of these actions finally do take place. Mm-hmm. Now, Spielberg based this work and the adaptation on Doris Kearns Goodwin's book, Team of Rivals, which is based on Lincoln choosing his political enemies to become members of his cabinet. But what about the decision Spielberg made to only focus on the certain months preceding the 13th Amendment's passing? And does it detract in any way from the audience getting a larger view of what a man Lincoln was, or even the achievements Lincoln achieved?
I think it worked excellently. That's probably why this movie is one of my favorite ones from last year, is because of its unique narrative structure. Just looking at those 4 months, rather than looking at an entire lifespan like a typical biopic, really puts it into focus how unique Lincoln really is. I mean, he's a storyteller. So he doesn't need to have his whole life fleshed out. He just needs his words.
That's an interesting point. Yeah. You really don't need to be exposed to those debates he had with Douglas when he was in Illinois, or even the first couple of things he did in office at the beginning of the Civil War. You could just take a glimpse with these, couple months and see the ability that this president had, and basically why he's given so much praise in modern history today.
Yeah, it was also a funny scene. It reminds me when he's like, "Oh, he's about to tell another story. I'm out of here." So it just shows Lincoln is a unique character filled with a lot of wise old stories. Like,
right.
That's why this biopic structure fits Lincoln. Yeah,
because of his storytelling ability, and you kind of capture him even in that slight amount of time that we get to see him.
Yeah.
We've been talking throughout this series this year that the Academy has recognized films that have had some sort of controversy surrounding them.
Mm-hmm.
And Lincoln has some of that too. Recent controversy has been about maybe facts about what congressmen and what states actually voted in favor.
Yeah.
Now, is the controversy justified in a movie like this? Like, or are people just trying to, pick little parts apart and say they were on the right side of history? Because a lot of things in American history, especially around the Civil War, are so muddled.
Yeah.
Right? These people had to unite after, right? It didn't matter if you were part of the Confederates or if you were a Union soldier. After that, you were both Americans. So, does it matter in this portrayal if one is put on the right side of history, the quote-unquote right side of history, and somebody else is not on the right side of history? Together, they had to move forward as Americans. So, for me, I don't think if slightly off. I didn't take too much offense to that.
I agree with you. I think there's no need to mince words here. I mean, the South wanted to maintain slavery. There's no way to get around that. And there's no justifiable reason, looking even 20, 30 years from the Civil War, of why there was a reason to keep slavery.
Right.
I mean, the only reason was so that they could keep the economic advantage. So
right. The South being a lot of cotton, a lot of farming, and then the labor that slaves provided help.
When you look at human rights, there's no reason that should outweigh the human rights that we see.
Okay. Yeah. So it's not the filmmaker's priority to position people in a softer light than maybe reality, but vice versa.
They already did to a point. I mean, they admitted that they did change names of the congressmen who voted down the Emancipation Proclamation,
right? So, to prevent any families.
Yeah. So exactly. So
that's true. Yeah, it's absolutely true.
Yeah.
The movie's titled Lincoln, and I think we, of course, have to talk about the title character's portrayal by Daniel Day-Lewis. And I think it's an interesting year where after Marlon Brando's passing, I've only heard two actors who've been called the greatest actor alive. One is Mr. Robert De Niro, who we talked about in Silver Linings Playbook.
Wait, we haven't talked about that yet. Okay, sorry.
And obviously Daniel Day-Lewis, who once again has a fantastic performance, seemingly every time he's on screen, every 2 or 3 years. Yeah. Can you talk about Daniel Day?
Well, Daniel Day-Lewis is a generational actor. I mean, a lot of people may say he's pretentious for his roles he picks, for picking roles that only he thinks are good for him, but I think he proves it. He comes into work on these roles and he nails them. Like every time when he puts on an iconic role like Lincoln.
Right.
Like when you're watching a movie, like you don't want to be distracted that this is this actor playing this role, right? When I was watching Lincoln, I was like, that's Abraham Lincoln. Like I believe he's Abraham Lincoln. Based on my knowledge of Abraham Lincoln, I'm seeing him on screen right now.
And I think when people actually got early glimpses of his performance, they were taken aback because it wasn't a traditional performance where Lincoln was a booming orator, someone who stood tall.
Mm-hmm.
It caught Lincoln with a strangely altered voice, which may actually be more realistic because there is no vocal recording of Lincoln.
Well, obviously.
And a person who was definitely looked older than he actually was, which in reality he was. He was a man who was worn down.
Yes.
By many things in his life. And in that sense, he portrayed him as somebody who had so much, history. And he played his bones and the way he walked and the way he talked. It was completely different than more of the heroic Lincoln portrayal, but I think effective nonetheless.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, we seem to be agreeing a lot on this podcast, but so we'll move on.
And I think a key thing in developing Daniel's performance and obviously being a movie about words was Steven Spielberg, who is obviously the most recognizable director of the last 40 years. He shows a lot of restraint in this film. You don't have those cues that Spielberg is known for, those musical moments. They're there. John Williams' score is really, really amazing once again. But it's a very mellow direction style, muted almost. He lets the words and lets the actors really jump off the screen. Do you agree with what that is much more restrained Spielberg direction style?
Yeah, I could agree with that because there obviously were no set pieces in a movie like this, right? I mean, it showed a different side. I mean, people have criticized it for showing just like white guys talking in Congress. That it doesn't really show the horrors of the Civil War, right?
Right.
But it shows a side of the Civil War that you don't usually see. I mean, we've seen movies that depict the battle. We've seen movies that have depicted slavery, but this is a side that shows the process that took which is also important.
The leadership role beyond the generals, those individuals making those decisions.
It's a reflection of the time too. I mean, it's not you aren't going to see, just like today, you're not going to see the commander in chief commonly on the battlefield in the front lines.
Right.
Yeah.
And just going back, Lincoln's counterpart in this film, outside his political rivals, is his wife.
Yes.
Mary, played by Sally Field. It's such a challenging role. Mary Tyler Lincoln had bipolar disorder. It wasn't diagnosed, obviously, at that time. So a lot of mood swings and variances in emotion. And I think Sally Field really, when she's talked about this film, she's talked about how much she wanted to play this role. You know, she hasn't been, predominantly featured in feature films for many years now. But you almost realize right away that, yes, she's been honored twice by the Academy, and she's a worthy actress through and through.
Yeah. Like, I think people assume Mary Tyler Lincoln is just straight up crazy. I mean, as there are other movies that deal with mental illness more in depth, obviously, than Lincoln.
Right.
In this nomination batch, but it's a more nuanced performance because
it's just limited knowledge at the time about it, but even she's aware. History will write that you had to stay with a crazy woman all this life, and it's just a really fun scene, but still a shining light on what Mary Tyler Lincoln had to go through.
Yeah, I mean, he did lose 2 children. Yeah. I mean, in that time, I mean,
it's true. We're almost nearing the end of this edition of Inside the Academy Studio, and like always, we like to end with questions. So I ask, what was your favorite moment in Lincoln?
I think my favorite moment has to be when Thaddeus Stevens, played by Tommy Lee Jones' movie, another great performance.
Who was nominated this year and honored by the Academy?
Yes. After the Emancipation Proclamation is passed, and he walks out as an old man on his cane, and he sees the celebration, and he walks and just enters his home, and he's greeted by Lyona Hamilton Smith, who was some housekeeper mistress, but definitely a love of his life, right?
Right.
It just shows the reason why he was fighting so passionately for this. Emancipation Proclamation wasn't just for his own ideological reasons.
The greater good. It was personal for him.
Yeah, it was very personal, and it felt like a very fitting scene where he relaxes and he's like, "This is the future is in good hands now because of all the work we did."
Right.
Yeah.
My favorite moment of Lincoln goes back to that we said this was a movie about Lincoln being a storyteller, and it's when they're waiting news from a battle. There's 2 pages or 2 people working the messaging system, and then there's Abraham Lincoln sitting there in the dark and at night, bundled up, and he's telling these vibrant stories, and then these 2 awe-inspired young people are listening, and you can kind of see why people were so attracted and would go anywhere for Abraham Lincoln. So it was a great scene. Mm-hmm. What about your least favorite moment in Lincoln?
I think my least favorite moment would have to be it's a scene that obviously is necessary, indicating that Lincoln did die, but the pacing just felt off, like how it was introduced. Like we went through the entire process of passing this Emancipation Proclamation, then we just find out Lincoln is dead. So it just felt a little sudden and off to me, and it didn't flow with the rest of the movie.
Right. One of my least favorite moments was a scene when a group of African Americans, including the housekeeper at the White House, walked in to the House halls and people turn their heads and they're gawking. I don't know if it's entirely accurate, but I get the symbolism of it, putting a face to why people and why these congressmen should be fighting for it. But in a movie that's so toned down and constrained, it really seemed like a bigger moment than it should have been. I would maybe prefer in the directorial device, if Spielberg would have maybe pan to them instead of show them entering. I think it was definitely intended to have a response, and it was not the response that I was looking for as a viewer at that time.
Okay.
One of the last things we like to do is word association. So when we think Lincoln, we think
Declaration. I mean, it's about protecting the Constitution, so I just went with Declaration.
Declaration, and I think Top Hat. That's the common portrayal of Lincoln with his top hat. So when we think Lincoln, we think Declaration and Top Hat. That has been this edition of Inside the Academy Studio.
Thank you.